When the doctors told him he had only 90 days left to live, the world assumed he would spend his final days in luxury. But he did something so wild, the world laughed. A dying millionaire adopted 5 orphaned, hungry boys living on the streets. People said he's gone mad. But when his final days came, time revealed everyone's true face. Those who once laughed now roam the world with oceans of tears in their eyes. And those who never even had a glass of milk in their lives. Today, the world calls them sons of the Lionheart. If you'd like, I can help you turn this into a short story or even write a screenplay version. It has all the elements of a heart-touching drama. Want to build on it? Before starting the story, make sure to subscribe the channel so that you don't miss any update in future. They laughed. Not the kind of laugh that warms the heart, but the kind that slices through dignity like a dull blade. He stood there alone in the marble silence of his mansion's hallway, the cold echo of the doctor's words still stabbing his thoughts. 90 days, Mr. Grant. That's all you have left. Just 90. 3 months. And then? Silence. Oblivion. James Grant, a man whose net worth crossed $80 million, had spent a lifetime building empires, winning courtrooms, and investing in companies that turned dust into diamonds. He had cars he never drove, watches he never wore, and a mansion so big he couldn't remember how many rooms it had. But that day, he stood there, not as a millionaire, but as a man facing death, completely, utterly alone. And instead of booking a world tour or buying a yacht to party into the void, he drove downtown and stopped beside a stinking alley reeking of urine, smoke, and forgotten dreams. That's where he saw them. 5 boys. One had no shoes. One held a plastic bottle with more holes than hope. Another stared into a trash can like it was a treasure chest. And the other 2? Locked in a fight over a half-eaten sandwich. For a second, James just watched. Then he did something no one could have expected. He stepped out of his Bentley, and with a voice rough from silence, he asked, "What are your names?" The boys froze. They weren't used to being asked. They were used to being shooed away, to being kicked like trash, to being seen, but only as a problem. The smallest one, barely 7, stepped forward and said, "I'm Leo." His voice cracked, not from fear, but from hunger. James nodded slowly. "Leo," he repeated, as if trying to tattoo the name onto his fading soul. The others followed, reluctantly. Rael, the fighter. Benji, the quiet one. Micah, the one who hadn't spoken in weeks. And Zion, who only trusted rats more than people. James looked at them. These weren't just boys. They were versions of him, abandoned, hardened, overlooked. And what did he say next? Not "here's some money." Not "good luck, kids." Not even "let me take you for food." He said, "Come with me." They stared, confused, suspicious, half ready to run. Then Benji asked, "Why?" And James replied, without blinking, "Because I don't want to die a rich man. I want to die a father." The next morning, the newspapers screamed, "Billionaire adopts 5 street boys with only 90 days to live, midlife crisis or PR stunt? James Grant losing his mind before death?" Social media roasted him. They called the boys pity pets. They called James crazy. They laughed. Oh, how they laughed. But they didn't see the truth. They didn't see what happened inside the mansion's gates. They didn't see how Leo, for the first time in his life, slept in a bed. Or how Micah finally spoke, because someone finally listened. Or how Zion, who once stole to survive, painted pictures of galaxies because someone bought him paint. They didn't see James slowly coughing blood into his napkin, while still smiling as Rael read him bedtime stories. They didn't hear the laughter at 2 a.m. when Benji cracked his first real joke. They didn't feel what those boys felt. Not charity, not pity, but family. And then, on the 67th day, James collapsed. His body had grown weaker, his bones like glass. But in his final journal entry, found beside his hospital bed, were the words, "I thought I was saving them, but they They save me. Cut. Scene fades. Hold. Pause. Beat. But this? This was just the beginning. What those boys did after his death. What they became. How they made the world remember the name James Grant forever. That comes next. They buried James Grant on a rainy Tuesday. No celebrities. No press. No grand procession of suits and shining cars. Just 5 boys. In black suits 2 sizes too big. Holding hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. And staring at the ground like it had stolen their only chance at home. The world didn't show up. The world still thought it was a joke. Because to them, James Grant had died doing something crazy. But to those 5 boys, he had died doing the one thing no one else ever dared. He saw them. He loved them. He chose them. Leo tried to speak at the grave, but his voice cracked on the first word. Benji stepped in, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "You already said everything, bro, by just being here." They stood in silence as the rain soaked their collars and blended with their tears. Not one of them knew what came next. The mansion? The money? The world? What they did know was this. They weren't going back to the streets. James had left behind more than his will. He left behind a plan. And it started with an envelope. Plain, white, unmarked, found tucked inside James' study drawer, beneath an old photo of him as a child. The boys opened it together. Inside, a note, in clean, shaking handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, but you're not, and that means something." A second paper followed, typed, signed, official. James had transferred the rights of one of his companies, Lionheart Community Housing, to the boys. All 5, joint ownership, equal control. That wasn't all. A key, not to the mansion, but to a small, rundown building in the city's worst block. And written beside it, "Fix this place. Turn it into a home for the forgotten. Just like I tried to be for you. Make this my legacy, if you want it." Benji blinked hard. "He's really gone, huh?" Micah whispered, for only the second time in his life. "Not really." That night, they didn't sleep. Not because they were scared, but because they had purpose now. At sunrise, they drove, not in James' Bentley, but in an old van from the garage to the address. It was worse than they imagined. Cracked walls, shattered windows, graffiti that bled pain, and a smell that made even rail gag. "This?" Zion scoffed. "He left us. This?" Leo didn't answer. He walked up the steps, placed the key in the rusted lock, and turned it. The door creaked open. Dust swirled like ghosts. Roaches scattered across a broken tile floor. But in the center of the room, a table. On it, blueprints, handwritten notes, sketches of bunk beds, kitchens, art rooms, study areas. James had dreamed it all, and now it was their turn to build it. The next week was chaos. They cleaned. They painted. They learned how to fix pipes on YouTube. They watched tutorials on construction, applied for city permits, scraped walls, rebuilt toilets. They messed up. A lot. Benji flooded the hallway trying to install a new sink. Micah electrocuted himself mildly, trying to fix the lights. Zion punched a wall in frustration when a pipe burst for the 3rd time. But they didn't quit. Because quitting was what the world expected of them. And they were done living on the world's terms. One day, while hauling in some donated mattresses, an old man from the block leaned out of his window and shouted, "You boys the ones fixin' Lionheart?" Leo wiped sweat from his brow. "Yeah." The man squinted. "Thought that rich fool died?" Benji smiled faintly. "He did, but his heart didn't." The man nodded, then came down and started helping. That was the first. By the end of the month, the entire block was pitching in. Some brought old furniture. Others brought food. A single mom brought her kids and cleaned the floors for hours without saying a word. And when the doors of the new Lionheart home finally opened, There were 23 kids waiting outside. Shoeless, hopeless, silent. Until Leo opened the door and said, "You're not forgotten. Come in." That night, all 5 boys sat on the rooftop, watching the city breathe below them. Zion leaned back. "You think he's watching?" Rael shrugged. "He better be. We didn't nearly die painting this place for nothing." Micah, smiling, added softly, "He's watching. Through every kid in that hallway right now. Through every bed they sleep in. Every meal they eat. Every nightmare they don't face alone anymore." They were no longer just 5 boys from the street. They were founders, builders, brothers, carriers of a legacy the world once mocked. The same world that laughed was now watching in silence. But this was just the beginning of what they'd do, because James Grant's story had ended. But the story of his sons? That was only just starting. For a while, everything felt like a dream. The building was alive. Laughter echoed in the halls. The dining area was filled with the clatter of plates and the quiet hum of music Micah had started playing during meals. No one called it an orphanage. They called it home. But with every good story, there's always a shadow waiting around the corner. The news finally caught on. Not a small blog, not a local reporter, but national headlines. Ex-street boys build a legacy from a dead millionaire's wish. The Lionheart sons, from homeless to heroes. The headlines were gold. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle. And with the fame came the wolves. It started with an email. Benji opened it late one night, eyes half closed from exhaustion. The subject line read, "Urgent. Legal claim against property ownership." He sat up. Inside the email were scanned legal documents. Someone named Margot Whitman, claiming to be James Grant's distant cousin, was suing them for fraud, alleging that the adoption was fake, the boys manipulated a dying man, and that the Lionheart building belonged to her by blood right. Benji read the lines over and over. His throat went dry. He called Leo, voice shaking. "What if she wins, bro? What if they take it all?" Leo was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Let them try." But it wasn't just legal threats. It was the noise. The world that once mocked them now couldn't stop watching, picking them apart frame by frame. Zion got into a heated argument with a reporter outside the building. The reporter asked if they were using this whole thing as a way to stay out of poverty. Zion didn't yell. He just looked into the camera and said, "I lived in trash. I slept beside rats. I've been beaten, ignored, starved. And you think this is my way out?" Then he walked back inside, silent, burning. But the worst came a week later. The building was vandalized. Spray painted on the front wall in red, dripping paint were the words, "Charity frauds." Rael found it first. He didn't say a word. He just picked up a bucket, filled it with water, and started scrubbing. One by one, the others joined him. No music, no talking, just the sound of water, brushes, and 5 boys scrubbing away the world's hate like they'd been doing all their lives. Inside, the younger kids watched through the windows, confused, afraid, unsure what any of it meant. And that's when Micah, the quietest of them all, turned around and said something no one expected. "We're not just building walls, we're building them. Every time we clean, rebuild, fix, we're teaching them that when the world spits on you, you wipe it off. You don't become it." That night, they sat in the community room, lights low, all the kids huddled around. Leo stood up. He looked around at every face, tired, scared, looking for something to believe in. He took a breath. "Some people think we don't deserve this place, that we don't belong. But I want you to remember something. James didn't pick perfect boys. He picked broken ones. Not to fix us, but to show us that broken things still have purpose. That you still have purpose." A little girl raised her hand. "But what if they shut us down?" Leo smiled gently. "Then we build again. That's what family does." Outside, more reporters gathered. The lawsuit gained momentum. The court hearing was set for 3 weeks later. And while the boys tried to keep things normal inside, They knew this was war. Rail wanted to fight. Not in court, in the streets. Let me talk to her. 10 minutes. No cameras. Benji shook his head. This isn't the old us. James didn't raise us that way. Micah added, we fight in silence. With proof. With heart. They started digging. Looking into Margot Whitman. Her background, her finances, her motives. And what they found changed everything. Turns out, Margot wasn't just a distant cousin. She had tried to sue James once before, years ago, over another inheritance issue. The case was dropped due to lack of evidence and manipulation of documents. But this time, she had better lawyers, more media, and a motive. Because if she could prove the adoptions were fake or emotionally coerced, everything James left behind could legally default to her. They were losing sleep. Zion punched a hole in a wall again. Benji cried in the supply closet when he thought no one was looking. Leo stared at James' last photo every night before bed, silently begging for one more day of his guidance. Then came the court date. It was raining again. Almost like the sky remembered James. The courtroom was packed. Cameras outside. Protesters on both ends, some supporting the boys, others screaming words like scam, manipulation, PR stunt. The boys sat side by side. No lawyers of their own, just a public defender who barely believed in them. Then, Margot walked in. Expensive coat, cold eyes, a smirk that made Zion clench his fists. She spoke first. Said James was confused, vulnerable, lonely. Said the boys saw an opportunity and took it. Said they faked love to gain access. Said the whole Lionheart home was just a cover. The judge nodded. Took notes, asked questions, listened. Then came the boys' turn. Leo stood, alone. No lawyer, no speech, just heart. He took a shaky breath and said, James Grant didn't give us money. He gave us identity. We were never common. We were abandoned kids. He didn't die confused. He died fulfilled. And we're not using his name. We're carrying it. He looked around the courtroom. His voice didn't rise, but it reached everyone. We didn't take his legacy. We became it. Silence. Then the judge asked one question. Where's the proof? Benji stood up, pulled out a file. Inside letters, journal entries, videos recorded by James in his final days. In one of them, James stared into the camera, frail and pale, and said, If the world questions why I chose them, let them. I'm not asking for understanding. I'm asking for memory. These boys are not my charity. They are my sons. Period. And that moment, that single clip, might have saved everything. The judge didn't rule that day, but the courtroom walked out different. Reporters stayed quiet. Cameras dimmed. And somewhere in the background, the laughter had stopped. Because for the first time, the world had seen the truth. And that truth was about to echo louder than hate ever could. The verdict didn't come the next day, or the day after. It took 9 long days of silence. 9 days of waiting, of pretending, of waking up every morning not knowing if everything they built would still exist by nightfall. And then, the envelope arrived. Leo opened it with trembling fingers while the others stood behind him, too anxious to breathe. He read silently, twice, then looked up, eyes wet, and whispered one word. We won. No one moved. For a moment, the room was frozen, 5 boys trapped in disbelief. Then chaos. Benji dropped to his knees and laughed so hard he couldn't stop crying. Micah hugged Zion so tight they nearly knocked over a chair. Rail punched the air, yelling, yes, loud enough for the whole street to hear. And Leo, he just stood still, looking at the ceiling like James was up there watching. Outside, the sun was setting, gold light pouring through the windows like a blessing. And for the first time since James died, they let themselves believe they were safe. But safety is an illusion, especially when the world thinks you've become something bigger than it can control. The next week brought invitations, TV shows, radio stations, Online interviews, documentaries. Everyone wanted the Lionheart boys. "You're the new face of hope," one host said. "You inspire millions." Benji smiled politely but didn't answer. Zion refused all interviews. "We're not your story. We're our own." But Leo knew they couldn't hide forever. So he made a deal. One interview. Live. Primetime. It was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to share James' dream, to tell the world about Lionheart's mission, to show that love could rise from brokenness. But the media doesn't want quiet truth. They want drama. The host smiled on camera but asked questions that felt like daggers. "So, Leo, you were homeless. How does a homeless kid know how to manage millions?" "Benji, some say you're too young to run a foundation." "Thoughts?" "Rail, let's talk about that assault charge when you were 12. Micah shifted uncomfortably. Zion stood up mid-segment and walked off set. The rest of the boys stayed. They answered every question. Calm, clear, unshaken. Because what the world didn't understand was they were built in fire. No spotlight could melt what had already survived flames. But that night, the internet exploded. Hashtags, memes, hate, love, confusion, division. Some called them heroes. Some called them liars. And quietly, someone else was watching. A man named Victor Crane, an investor, billionaire, former business partner of James Grant. He hadn't spoken publicly in years. Not since a fallout with James that the media still whispered about. And now, he released a video. Professionally shot, polished, sharp. He stood in front of a massive glass tower and said, "I knew James. We built things together." But in the end, he lost himself. These boys didn't carry his legacy. They stole it. The video went viral in hours. Suddenly, Lionheart wasn't just a home. It was a battleground of narratives. Was it charity? Was it manipulation? Were these boys healing or performing? And in the middle of it all, the kids inside the Lionheart home, the real reason any of this began, were starting to feel it. One of the younger boys, 9-year-old Elias, stopped eating for 3 days. He told Micah, "What if they take this away? I don't want to go back to the street." Micah sat beside him for an hour. No words, just presence. That night, Leo called a meeting. All staff, all kids, everyone. He stood in front of them, tired but steady. "I know the world is loud right now," he said. "But in here, it's quiet. And real. Out there, they call us liars. In here, we know what we've lived." He paused, looked at every face. This isn't just a shelter. This is a resistance against the belief that broken people stay broken. The room was silent, until Elias raised his hand and asked, "But what if they win?" Leo knelt down, looked him in the eye, and said, "Then we rise again. That's what Lionhearts do." But Leo knew. Victor Crane wasn't done. And he was right. 2 days later, the first threat came. A formal challenge, audit request, demanding to see every dollar Lionheart had spent since James' death. The timing wasn't random. It was warfare. Rail nearly lost it. "This isn't about money. This is about breaking us." Leo nodded. "Exactly. So we don't break." They opened every record, every receipt, every file. Micah spent 16 hours organizing donation trails. Benji worked on the digital logs. Zion ran security. Rail updated the kids. Leo handled the lawyers. They didn't sleep for 3 days. But they didn't bend. Because they had already learned the most dangerous lesson of all. The world only respects pain if you wear it with pride. And James hadn't raised survivors. He'd raised soldiers. The audit passed. No fault found. Victor's attack failed. But Leo knew this wouldn't stop. So he did something no one expected. He invited Victor to Lionheart. Live. On camera. No tricks, he said publicly. No filters. Just come. Talk to the boys. Look them in the eye. The internet exploded. Again. Victor accepted. But what happened in that meeting was nothing anyone could have predicted. And it would change everything. Victor Crane arrived in silence. Black suit, no smile, surrounded by bodyguards with eyes like stone. He didn't shake hands, didn't look around. He stepped into Lionheart with the kind of cold presence that made the air feel heavier. But the boys were ready. Leo stood in the main hallway, arms folded, steady as ever. "Mr. Crane," he said calmly. Victor raised an eyebrow. "You look like him." Leo didn't flinch. "We're nothing alike." Victor's gaze swept the building. Clean floors, quiet halls, a girl laughing in the distance. This wasn't a charity. It was a heartbeat. "You built something impressive," Victor admitted. "James did," Benji said, stepping beside Leo. "We just made sure it didn't die with him." Victor gave a small laugh, the kind that held no joy. "I knew James when he thought the world could be changed by money. Then he met you. And suddenly, it was all heart this and legacy that. He forgot who he was." Zion stepped forward. "No. He finally became who he was." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, what do you think happens when this place crumbles? When the donations stop? When the media moves on? Love won't pay bills." Rail smiled, not out of joy, but clarity. "That's what you never understood. We were never built on money. We were built on what happens when no one else shows up and someone finally does." Victor glanced away. He didn't argue, didn't speak. Instead, he asked, "Show me the children." They hesitated, but Leo nodded. He led Victor through the building. Past the art room where paintings covered every inch of wall, explosions of color from hands that once only knew how to steal. Through the music room where laughter echoed louder than notes. Into the library where a boy named Eli sat with headphones on, reading a book about planets. Victor watched them, not with warmth, but with something else, something fractured. In the dining room, he saw a girl folding napkins beside a boy stacking plates. Not because they were told, but because they wanted to help. "This is what he died for?" Victor asked quietly. Leo didn't answer. He didn't have to. They walked to the rooftop. Sunset bathed the city in orange and gold. It looked like hope. Victor stood by the railing, silent for a long time. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket. An envelope. He handed it to Leo. Inside was a document. Legal, official, sealed. Benji read it, then froze. "You're donating." "What?" Victor looked at them all. "A building. 2, actually. Downtown. No strings. For expansion. Name it what you want." Zion stepped forward. "Why?" Victor's voice was low, barely audible over the wind. "Because I lost a brother to pride. And I won't lose his memory to it, too." Then he turned to leave. But before he stepped back inside, he stopped. "I wasn't wrong when I said James changed. He did. But maybe he changed me too. Just took a little longer." He left that night. No cameras. No statements. Just silence. The next morning, the story broke. Victor Crane donates 2 buildings to Lionheart Legacy. Rival becomes ally. A stunning turn for James Grant's legacy. The world that had once laughed, once doubted, once ripped these boys apart, was now watching in reverence. Not because they were perfect, but because they never stopped showing up. Months passed. The new buildings opened. One became a transitional home for kids turning 18, the other a vocational center. Micah started teaching music. Benji began coding classes. Rail coached boxing in the basement. Zion built a studio where street kids could record their own stories. And Leo led it all. Quietly. Without fame. Without needing applause. One evening, a new boy arrived. 8 years old. Thin. Wild eyes. Mute. He didn't speak for the first 3 days. Then on the 4th, Leo sat beside him during lunch. "You know," Leo said, "I didn't speak much either. When I first got here, I didn't know if this place was real." The boy stared at his tray. Leo smiled softly, but then I realized it's not about the walls. It's about the people who don't leave. The boy looked up, just for a second, and whispered, "Are you gonna leave?" Leo's answer was simple: never. Years later, that boy would become one of the directors of Lionheart, because that's what James Grant built. Not just a home, not just a miracle, but a legacy that lived inside everyone it touched. And even now, when someone walks through those doors, whether they're broken, scared, silent, or lost, they don't hear lectures. They don't feel pity. They hear 5 boys' laughter echoing through the halls. They feel a millionaire's last wish breathing through the bricks. They see photos on the wall of James, of Leo, of the first night the lights were ever turned on. And they read the quote etched across the entry gate: "He gave us love when no one gave us a name." The world still tells stories. But this one tells itself. And for those who ever laughed at James Grant's choice, for those who called it madness, pity, a waste, they now understand. Sometimes it only takes 90 days to build a forever. True wealth isn't measured by what you leave behind in your bank account, but by what you leave behind in people's hearts. One act of love, even in your final days, can ripple through generations and turn broken lives into powerful legacies. This story reminds us that family isn't always blood. It's chosen, built, and proven through sacrifice, loyalty, and unconditional care. Even in the face of doubt, hate, and struggle, love paired with purpose can rewrite destiny.